unless one is wealthy, there is no use in being a charming fellow. Romance is the privilege of the rich, not the profession of the poor. The poor should be practical and prosaic. It is better to have a permanent income than to be fascinating. These are the great truths of modern life which Huey Erskine never realized. Poor Huey. Intellectually, we must admit, he was not of much importance. He never said a brilliant or even an ill-natured thing in his life. But then he was wonderfully good-looking, with his crisp brown hair, his clear-cut profile, and his gray eyes. He was as popular with men as he was with women, and he had every accomplishment except that of making money. His father had bequeathed him his cavalry sword and a history of the Peninsular War in 15 volumes. Huey hung the first over his looking-glass, put the second on a shelf between Ruff's Guide and Bailey's Magazine, and lived on $200 a year that an old aunt allowed him. He was in love with a beautiful girl named Laura Merton, whose father, a retired colonel, would not hear of the match unless Huey could show 10,000 pounds. Huey had no prospects, only debts and devotion. One morning, Huey dropped in to see a great friend of his, Alan Trevor, a painter. Trevor was a strange, rough fellow with a freckled face and a red, ragged beard who, when he was not painting, was always thinking about painting. Having a natural antipathy to academicians, he had presented 3 pictures to the Grosvenor Gallery and had been hailed by the public as a great master. He was, however, very simple in his habits and had a good deal of genuine feeling for the work of art. When Huey came in, he found Trevor putting the finishing touches to a wonderful life-size picture of a beggar man. The model himself was standing on a raised platform in a corner of the studio, a wizened old man with a face like a wrinkled parchment and a most piteous expression. Over his shoulders was flung a coarse brown cloak, all tears and tatters. His thick boots were patched and cobbled, and with one hand he leant on a rough stick, while with the other he held out his battered hat for alms. He looked the very picture of misery. Trevor stood at some distance from his canvas, examining the work with a critical eye. "What an amazing model," whispered Huey as he shook hands with his friend. "He is a professional beggar, I suppose," whispered Huey. "I don't know," answered Trevor. "I picked him up in the street and gave him $1 a sitting. I have had him for 3 weeks now, and in another week I shall have the picture finished." "Poor old chap," said Huey. "How miserable he looks. But I suppose, to you painters, his face is his fortune." "Certainly," replied Trevor. "You don't want a beggar to look happy, do you?" "How much does a model get for a sitting?" asked Huey, as he found himself a comfortable seat on a divan. $1 an hour." "And how many hours do you work a day?" "About 10. "Then the model earns more than I do," laughed Huey. A few moments later, Trevor was called away by his assistant, leaving Huey alone with the old beggar. Huey felt in his pockets and found only a sovereign and some coppers. "Poor old fellow," he thought to himself. "He wants it more than I do. But it means no cab fare home." And he slipped the sovereign into the beggar's hand. The old man started, and a faint smile flitted across his withered lips. "Thank you, sir," he said. "Thank you." Then Trevor returned, and Huey took his leave, blushing a little at his own extravagance. That night, Huey dined with his friend at the Palette Club. After dinner, Trevor said, "Well, Huey, I've got some rather good news for you." Old Nausberg. Who is old Nausberg? Interrupted Huey. My dear boy, don't you know? He's one of the richest men in Europe. He could buy all London tomorrow without overdrawing his account. He has a house in every capital and dines off gold plate. He came to me this morning and said he had been greatly touched by your giving him that sovereign. He told me to tell you he thought it was the most remarkable piece of good nature he had ever witnessed. You don't mean to say, cried Huey, that the old beggar was Baron Hausberg himself, said Trevor. My dear Alan, said Huey, sinking into an armchair, you might have told me who he was. To have given a sovereign to one of the richest men in Europe. Oh, he looks the part to perfection, answered Trevor. Besides, I didn't know myself until his valet arrived at the studio shortly after you left, with his card and an invitation for me to come to supper. Huey groaned, and Trevor did nothing but laugh the entire evening. Huey walked home, feeling thoroughly ashamed of himself. The next morning, as Huey was at breakfast, his servant brought him a letter. Who can that be from? He said to himself. I don't know the handwriting. He opened it and found it contained a check for £10,000, and the following letter. Dear Mr. Erskine, I have the pleasure of sending you a wedding present from a friend. Allow me to congratulate you on your good taste in selecting a wife who is so charming as Miss Laura Merton. You showed an act of genuine kindness towards one who was, to all outward appearance, in great distress. It is not often that one meets with the young men who are so simply and so naturally charitable. The letter was signed a Model Millionaire, and the check had been drawn in the name of Laura Merton's father to enable the marriage to go forward. Huey was dumb with amazement. He rushed round to Laura's house and told her. They were both in a state of great excitement, hardly able to believe the wonderful news. What a strange story, cried Laura. Alan was in it, of course, said Huey. Bless the old Baron, said Laura, when she had recovered from her surprise. I only wish I could do something for him. I did that already, said Huey, laughing. I gave him a sovereign when the Colonel was told the whole story, for it needed some delicate explanation. He was considerably mollified, and, it must be admitted, rather charmed by the romantic incident. As for the Baroness Hausberg, who was fond of good causes, she sent Laura a complete set of household silver as an additional wedding gift. The marriage took place 3 months later in St. George's, Hanover Square, and Alan Trevor was best man. Trevor had never been so happy in his life, for he felt, in some vague way, that he had had a hand in bringing two such pleasant people together. Baron Hausberg himself, though he did not attend, sent the most magnificent bouquet of orchids that had ever been seen in London. It is the most romantic thing I have ever heard, said Alan Trevor, as he stood in the vestry afterwards. Do you know, I am almost sorry I told Huey who the old man was. It quite spoils the story. My dear Alan, said the Colonel, who by this time had been thoroughly won over, if you had not told him, there would have been no story to spoil. And he was perfectly right. As for the card that came with the Baron's gift, it bore only 4 words in the old man's own hand. A Model Millionaire, which is, when one considers it carefully, the most satisfactory of all possible endings.